we understand how nature's trying to shape New York City, then maybe we can make New York City fit into the nature of the place, and in that way make it possible to live in the city into the next 400 years, and maybe the 400 years after that.
From the sky, it's clear that New York City was boldly built right to the water's edge. It's a coastal city surrounded by water on all sides. Just a century ago, there was more cargo tonnage and people passing through this port than all other major harbors in the country combined. With 578 miles of coastline, all that water is now New York's greatest threat.
The real challenge for us in the 21st century is, can we be as wise as we are smart? We're so smart about so many things. You know, we're so clever, and yet somehow when it actually comes to making the hard decisions, the wise decisions based on what we know, we have trouble doing that. I don't know how many more examples nature needs to give us to do the right thing.
The world's great cities face threats they have never before encountered. New York, Tokyo, London, Miami. The threats come from the sea, from above, and from below. These are the problems and their solutions. For when the water comes.
Mandatory evacuation. All residents are urged to comply with this evacuation request.
In 2012, Superstorm Sandy catches New York by surprise. The city is flooded with 1.6 billion gallons of water containing raw and partially treated sewage. The storm surge, measuring over 13 feet, engulfs New York with over 700,000 tons of debris. It is the worst natural disaster in the city's history. Trevor Holland is a resident and an attorney in a neighborhood called Two Bridges.
On the Lower East Side, it is called Two Bridges because our neighborhood is located between the two bridges, the Manhattan Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge.
The median household income in this inner city neighborhood of 38,000 people is just over $21,000. That's well under half of the average median income of New York City.
It's an affordable neighborhood, working class individuals. We're in a very diverse neighborhood, one of the most diverse in Manhattan. Different economic levels, different races, different creeds, different religion. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love living here.
Two Bridges is situated on New York's floodplain. At 5 to 10 feet above sea level, parts of it will be completely underwater if sea levels rise by 6 feet in the next century, as predicted.
Someone had talked about storm amnesia, and I think that does happen because you forget how bad it was. One of the more vivid scenes I remember is that we take a look in the backyard area where our playground is. There were 3 or 4 homeless people who didn't get the notice that a storm was coming. They don't have cell phones, they're not watching the news. They just realized that the water is rising. And they were basically trapped in that area, and they were standing in water trying to figure out how to get out of this. I remember that vividly, thinking, how many people, they didn't get the news flash that a storm was coming. And they were just sleeping along the river, and then all of a sudden the water came up. And there's their porters. They stayed overnight. They had no choice. This one is actually South Street. This was early in the storm. The water had just come over the edges. When you think of Manhattan, you kind of think of all apartment buildings. You don't really think that, you know, a building flooding, you know, especially in our particular neighborhood. This was the point where we could no longer enter the street. I mean, this is the side of the building, and that's actually a sidewalk you can see on the right side. It had already come up to the 4-foot wall that is outside of our building. And looking down into the street, a sea of water, a river of water.
Two Bridges got slammed by the storm surge in 2012, and it will be slammed again.
We know that there's going to be another big hurricane that hurricane could come next year, and they're going to blame the politicians for not acting fast enough. We have to recognize that climate change is here. We know that there's going to be sea level rise, and we know that storms are getting more intense. We should find ways as a society for people to live in a safe way. We're so creative about our science. But somehow we haven't really brought our full suite of creativity to this question.
This place is on the edge. It's on the edge of the continent. And that's what makes New York City so special, and that also is what's threatening New York City going into the future.
New York City faces two challenges. The first is the inevitable fact that the city lies in a hurricane zone, and storms will continue to come no matter what.
My kids are 10 and 15. They know that they're going to have to live with this the rest of their lives. I think this is something that is embedded in us as people who've had to live through it.
The second is rising sea levels.
I think that people in New York understand that sea level is rising and that it's a critical problem. How much it's rising and how we'll adapt, those are still open questions.
The challenges are clear, but what are the solutions? How can New York adapt and survive?
We're going to go out and we're going to just swap one instrument, put in a new, fresh instrument, so we get good quality measurement.
Philip Orton works on the front line of the effort to measure the rising seas. He monitors the Hudson River, gathering present-day data to predict and maybe prevent future catastrophe.
We've got a buoy offshore. It's got a sonde, an instrument that has many sensors on it, that's measuring pH, the oxygen, salinity of the water, temperature of the water, water elevation. And there's instruments all up and down the Hudson that'll send the data to the internet, which we take into our database. We collect the data for the forecast model. Much like with the weather forecast, you can merge the best information you have to form the initial conditions in order to launch your next forecast.
These gauges help Orton understand which parts of the city are most at risk when the next big storm or hurricane hits. After Sandy, Orton's data was used in modeling to see what New York would look like with 6 feet of sea level rise by 2100.
So this is a satellite map showing New York City without any flooding. Shown here is Broad Channel, the Rockaways, Lower Manhattan, and over here is Staten Island. If you get 6 feet of sea level rise, the everyday average high tide is going to start flooding a lot of neighborhoods. It's high tide in 2100. This is now showing tidal flooding of places like South Street Seaport, Lower Manhattan, a lot of flooding around Jamaica Bay, also on Staten Island. Hundreds of thousands of people being flooded at that point. It's uninhabitable when you start getting flooded so many times per year. That's tidal flooding, but then there's also storm surges. We can also look at what 2100 would hold if we had a very severe storm like Hurricane Sandy, plus 6 feet of sea level rise. A much larger percentage of the coastal zone is flooded. The west side of Manhattan, the Tribeca district, Wall Street, Battery Park, Lower East Side.
Sandy flooded 51 square miles, 17% of the city. With 6 feet of sea rise, those numbers would be closer to 100 square miles, or about a third of the city underwater.
This kind of flooding would be catastrophic. There's massive infrastructural elements for a city of 8 million people that are in the flood zones. Transportation system, the tunnels, the subways, the electrical system, and of course a lot of these things were flooded just by Hurricane Sandy, so if you envision 6 feet of sea level rise, then a great deal more is at risk at that point. The whole city could be disabled in this kind of flood scenario. It's almost certain if we don't reduce our carbon dioxide emissions that we'll have sea level rise of that scale in the 22nd century. New York City's 300 years old. At this rate, we won't make it to another 300 years.
When we designed and built New York, we did not think of floods and storms.
New York's century-old subway system is a disturbing example of the challenges the city faces from rising seas and powerful storms. The subway moves almost 6 million people every day, the largest transit service in the country. With 840 miles of track, enough to stretch all the way to Chicago. But it's now in critical need of maintenance as New York adapts to the perils of climate change.
This is the South Ferry Station. Water entrance actually through this entrance. I went all the way down the stairs and flooded the entire station. There was actually 3-4 feet of water on the mezzanine. Everybody was surprised that the whole station got flooded. Nobody anticipated that much water coming in and actually flooding the whole station. First of all, there was an urgency to get service back. So there was urgency to get all of the water out, pump everything. There was like 7 or 8 million gallons of water that had to be pumped out. And it took weeks to pump it out. So once they pumped out all of the water, then the station was assessed to see what was damaged and what had to be done.
Joe Loda is the chairman of the Metropolitan Transit Authority. He says that the city's 14 submerged subway tunnels are in jeopardy due to storm surge and rising seas.
The subway system was built over about 115 years ago now. And when they opened it, I don't think they ever envisioned the rising tides that we're experiencing now in the 21st century. Pretty much all of our tunnels were damaged, not just the actual rail equipment, but the side of the walls. We had South Ferry Station here in Lower Manhattan, pretty much brand new, completely renovated, that was completely destroyed. The water went all the way up to the steps. It's 2 stories below ground. It was completely flooded. We need to rebuild the system.
Dr. Klaus Jacob is a disaster risk and climate expert. In 2011, he released a study that warned it would only take a single superstorm combined with sea level rise to flood and destroy the city's most vulnerable subway tunnels.
We did these studies in close cooperation with the engineering staff of the Metropolitan Transit Authority, whose subdivision runs the subway system, looking not only at the present but for the 2030s, 2050s, 2080s, and the end of the century. Our focus really was climate change and how would New York City adapt to that rising sea level with storms superimposed on top. Our results showed that the Achilles heel of New York City would be the subway system. We had computed that it would take only about 40 minutes to fill whatever can be filled. But if you have 6 feet of water already in addition, a city like New York City has no choice but to take action.
The subway is just one of several critical infrastructure assets New York City has to protect from rising sea levels and powerful storms.
It's a $7 to $8 billion problem. It's not just the subways. We also have numerous bridges and tunnels. We also have the commuter rail lines, Metro North and the Long Island Railroad, that we need to make resilient because that's how people get to and from work, to and from school. They're the arteries that allow the lifeblood of the metropolitan area to stick together.
New York's population is at its highest in history and shows no sign of declining. 8.6 million people now call the 5 boroughs home, and that population has risen 5.5% since 2010, leading the state in population growth.
I have looked at the evolution of New York City over its 400 years of existence. It has undergone so many mutations. I mean, it did not look anything like it looks now. Why should it look in 100 years anything like it looks now?
Clues to the future challenges New York City faces may be found in its past, in urban development that started over 300 years ago.
I remember getting a call from Bill not all that long after Hurricane Sandy, and he asked if we have maps which show in a really dramatic fashion how the landfill in New York City had an impact on the severity of the storm.
My name is Bill Johnson. In 2012, I was director of the statewide mapping program, part of the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. They were hoping that the maps would help them understand the underlying issues related to the storm. And so we started thinking about how we could help her with this work.
My reaction to this kind of request was excitement in that we had means to contribute to helping the city become a more resilient place.
We started thinking about overlays of aerial imagery with historic maps.
We had all of these maps here in digital format already, and we had them stretched over the same geographic grid so that they lined up when we compare them.
Those were the raw ingredients we needed. We had an accurate representation of everything that had changed between 1609 and 2012, as evidenced in an aerial photo. So when we overlay this 1860 map on the 1767, what's immediately apparent is that there's a tremendous expansion. Here's the 1767 shoreline I'm tracing with my finger. So all of this from here out to here is new. We overlay that on the modern map of Manhattan, and you can see how much of Lower Manhattan is actually constructed on the man-made reclaimed land.
An area which was formerly undeveloped is the scene of a project in which employment is provided for both skilled and unskilled workers. A long bulkhead was built to reclaim land from the waters of the bay.
Almost 4 square miles of modern-day Manhattan is built on landfill, added all along the city's coasts.
We took the Sandy storm surge data and overlaid it on top to see if there was alignment between the man-made lands and where the flooding occurred from Sandy. And what we can see is that it very dramatically aligns with the man-made area. What this really reveals is that the flooding from Superstorm Sandy is largely man-made. The flooding occurred largely as a result of 400 years of human activity that basically created a new floodplain. And that floodplain is densely filled with modern urban infrastructure, subway tunnels, power plants, and that's where we saw the damage from flooding from Sandy.
The reclaimed land Johnson identifies is a critical part of the U.S. economy. Banking, finance, technology, communication, insurance. More Fortune 500 companies have offices here than anywhere else on the planet.
We are the financial capital of the country, if not the world. We are the center of arts and media. Many of the media companies for this country, if not the world, are headquartered here. We have to get it right because of what we mean to the economy of the country and the economy of the world. And we need to do better.
Despite dire warnings, 63% of New Yorkers who were under mandatory evacuation stay put through Sandy. Many stay because they have no choice.
That's typical in a lot of the affordable neighborhoods in New York City, and it's a stark contrast to a lot of the other neighborhoods. People just don't have the resources to leave. They shelter in place, and they're used to sheltering in place during the typical disasters that we've had in New York. Where are they going to go?
The city has created new evacuation zones that can accommodate 3 million New Yorkers.
You don't want to put people's lives at risk. You have hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, affected by the decision to evacuate. It is costly as well. You're opening shelters, there's an economic impact, but you have to say life safety is the most important thing. There's certainly always going to be a challenge with people making that decision of do they want to leave their homes. The best thing you can do is tell people you have to take this seriously.
But evacuation is a Band-Aid solution for a life-threatening problem. Rising sea levels that will make parts of the city permanently uninhabitable, unless innovative engineering can make a difference. That takes political will.
My name is Dan Zarilli. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer and the Senior Director for Climate Policy and Programs here in the Mayor's Office. There's been a lot of activity to make sure that we are more aware of what it means to live by the coast, and that sometimes you may get wet, but we're continuing to invest and make sure that we are able to bounce back quicker from those events, and that we're building a stronger New York City at the end of this. The vulnerabilities aren't just something that's going to show up in 100 years. They're here, they're now, and we need to invest to mitigate those risks. And that means that we're looking at a full range of coastal defense investments. We're implementing them, new building code regulations, new zoning code regulations, upgrading our infrastructure.
In the search for solutions to save the city, Dan Zarilli has turned to the private sector.
We are not an infrastructure-forward country right now.
Vishaan Chakrabarty is one of the architects and urban thinkers who is tackling the problem head-on.
The last time we were was under President Eisenhower.
The highway construction program initiated by Ike is the biggest peacetime enterprise ever undertaken. It will cost tens of billions.
That was the last time this nation moved a quantum leap forward in terms of its infrastructure, and we haven't done it since.
The elimination of waste spending made a balanced budget possible.
As much as I love New York, our biggest problem in my mind is that we have substandard infrastructure that's over 100 years old. I think we need to really step back and holistically look at all the infrastructure in the city. Do we have train stations that function properly? Do we have subways that can run in these situations? In the world's richest country and the richest city of the world's richest country, are we going to say that we're not going to do something about this?
The question remains, does New York City really need to spend huge sums on expensive mega projects to protect itself from rising sea levels? The answer may lie in a vault in Massachusetts. Historical records reveal evidence of previous megastorms in New York, and researchers look for patterns to determine if they are getting more frequent and worse.
This is the Seafloor Samples Lab. It's a national archive of all the sediment cores that have been taken over the last several decades.
Jeff Donnelly is a senior scientist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.
They're samples from all over the world, tens of thousands of them. We maintain this archive so that scientists can come and resample cores that may have been taken long before they were even born.
These core sediment samples were taken by scientists in New York dating back to 1721.
One of the things that makes New York especially vulnerable to hurricane strikes is the sort of shape of the coastline there. So you've got the bight where New York and New Jersey come together. As a storm comes up the eastern seaboard, it's focusing water into that bight and causing greater levels of storm surge.
Just like tree rings can tell the story of climate change, core sediment samples offer clear signs of powerful hurricanes across the past 300 years.
You can see these really distinctive sand layers here that are deposited within this salt marsh peat. And it's these layers that tell us about the high energy event that occurred. So it's hurricane waves and storm surge overtopping the beach, transporting the beach sand into the salt marsh. We already had well documented the 1821 hurricane, but didn't really have a very good modern analog for which we had modern measurements. Hurricane Sandy provided an opportunity to do a comparison with these earlier events. We know from the documentary record that the storm surge for 1821 was actually even higher than Sandy. It was probably about 14, 15 feet worth of storm surge. The 1821 hurricane hit when sea levels were about 2 feet lower.
Every century, the city gets slammed.
You don't even need a bigger and badder storm than 1821. You have 1821 come back, you've already got to add 2 feet to that just because of the sea level rise that's occurred since then.
Donnelly's findings confirm Superstorm Sandy was not the exception, but the rule, common to every century. In fact, the storm surge in 1821 was 1.5 times the height and strength of Sandy.
They're more of an order of once every 70, 80, 100 years.
New York's population then was just over 120,000 people, most of whom did not live on the water's edge.
In the next century, sea levels forecast to rise at least 3 more feet. So you can imagine how much more infrastructure and people are at risk as every foot sea level rises.
Donnelly's findings confirm that New York has always been hit by hurricanes. The next storm is coming, and more people than ever will be living along New York's coasts when the city floods. This is how New York City's coast looked in 1821, when the last megastorm before Sandy hit. Stark, wild, flat, and vulnerable. It's a salt marsh in New Jersey, 20 miles from Manhattan.
It's interesting to know that sea level goes up and goes down, but if you want to correlate it with climate, you need to know when.
Horton and his team also use core sediment samples to research the prehistoric climate of New York. But instead of focusing on the patterns of sand layers, they look at microscopic organisms to determine if sea levels have risen dramatically in the prehistoric past.
The 4 meters of sediment represents approximately the last 2,000 years of Earth's history. Nice, though. We take these cores back and we try and record precisely how sea level has changed. Has it accelerated? Has it decelerated? And then correlate those with changes in climate. The microfossils that we're looking at under the microscope are single-celled organisms known as foraminifera. Okay, let me have a look.
Horton's looking for microscopic fossils that come from the marsh when the water is at its highest and lowest. The presence of these fossils gives a clear picture of changing sea levels across hundreds of years.
So based upon the changes in the abundance of any individual species tells you how sea level has changed through time.
The research shows that for well over 1,500 years, sea levels were stable. 200 years ago, that changed. Not coincidentally with the Industrial Revolution.
Beginning in the latter part of the 19th century is where sea level accelerated. When we correlate climate and sea level, we see a near perfect relationship. Whenever climate warmed, sea levels accelerated. One of the fundamental questions that as climate scientists we are asked is the modern rates of change unprecedented? We were able to show that the rates of sea level rise in the 20th and the 21st century had not been seen for the previous 2,000 years. The latest projections predict that New York City would receive an upper estimate of sea level of around 2 meters by 2,100, or around 6 feet. We're living in a very, very unusual time. We have a clear choice, and therefore we still have hope. But if we don't make urgent action, then all bets are off.
With a 6-foot sea rise, according to Horton's research, a full 280 square miles of New York will be lost forever, a sunken city. 600,000 New Yorkers will lose their homes. 300,000 jobs will be displaced or lost. The poorest will take the hardest hit, with 12,000 public housing units cut off by the sea. The people working the problem on the ground now seek solutions to rebuild and protect New York for the 22nd century. This is what's called the Big U. It's an ambitious mega project that would protect the $500 billion business sector in Lower Manhattan, the epicenter of the American economy.
My name is Kai-Uwe Bergman.
Uwe Bergman is an architect who leads the Big U project.
We have proposed 10 miles of contiguous flood protection, stretching from West 57th, 58th Streets along the entire coastline to the tip where Battery Park is right now, and then back up the East River to the 30s. That would protect all of the geography that is currently below the flood line.
The Big U is a massive seawall, in places 20 feet high, that would protect the most vital business district in the U.S. from sea level rise of up to 15 feet. Its surface would be primarily parkland, with sports facilities, playgrounds, and bike and walking paths all along the 10 miles of coastline it is designed to protect.
In the case of New York, there was a realization that climate change is something that we need to address. You can think of the Big U as actually a giant gutter, because it also is dealing with all of the rain that's hitting the streets while a hurricane event or a storm event is happening. The Big U has also a contiguous bike trail, so if it were all built out, all 10 miles, you could ride a bicycle for 10 miles and never cross a street. You could say that the coastline of Manhattan is actually going from a working waterfront to one that is about leisure, it's about health and well-being, and making the waterfront accessible.
The Big U will be realized in stages. the first being a 2.5-mile stretch on the Lower East Side. The city has approved the plan with a budget of $305 million. Trevor Holland lives in a neighborhood the Big U would protect. As a lawyer and a resident, he took part in meetings with the developers, who say the project would protect two bridges from the rising sea.
This neighborhood has planning fatigue. We've been through dozens of meetings about what we're gonna do, we're gonna change this, we're gonna add this, and a lot of those plans wind up on the shelves. You go through this process of trying to figure out a way to protect the neighborhood, and you wind up with a nice, big, glossy booklet that sits on the shelf, and nothing happens.
That's not Holland's only problem with the Big U.
We fought so long to get access to the waterfront, and now one of the solutions that they're proposing is to basically close it off. We're gonna build 10-foot walls, all made of concrete, and you'll be protected, good to go. We've been asking, is this the only solution? Is there anything else? Or are we just looking at walls? I mean, what have other cities done?
Holland's not alone. There are others who think the Big U is a step in the wrong direction.
In Rotterdam, they are designing underground parking garages. So if they know a storm is coming, they evacuate the cars, and they build that parking garage so that it can be a water holding tank that holds millions of gallons of water, so that water doesn't go out into the community. And then when the water recedes, they have a mechanism to pump the water out of the parking garage. The parking garage does double duty. So there are ways to design around these problems. I don't think the answer is you're gonna retreat from all of Lower Manhattan. We have to figure out how to build things more resiliently.
Geophysicist Klaus Jacob has other concerns.
How high do you make those seawalls before you are in a prison? And that's not a sustainable solution.
That's a dystopian picture. It's just a wall. And most of it, in fact, is just a concrete and rebar wall. And I think that going in that direction makes our cities more brittle. It's so easy for that wall to break. I mean, I worked in New Orleans for 8 years. Walls break. Unexpected things happen. A barge whacks up against it. There's always something unexpected.
Hill's greatest concern is that all walls eventually have to come down. She believes in building in layers, with every generation contributing to the work done by the last.
A wall, that's rigid, that's fixed in place, the design is only for that specific location. We should spend that same amount of money to put things in place that can be added to. We need to build the foundation for future generations.
Urban architect Pippa Bashir agrees that living behind a wall is a future she cannot imagine.
It's fundamentally going to change the culture. And is that the New York City we want to live in? It's not the New York City I chose to live in. One of my greatest fears for the future of New York City is that we won't get past that protect question.
I'm a little bit of a skeptic of anything that says, oh, we're gonna keep the water out over here, because it's gonna go somewhere. It was conceived of as a big giant wall, and they might have said, well, we're gonna put some grass on it so it'll look nice, but it's still a big giant wall. This notion that we're just gonna build a giant fence around New York City and keep this from happening is not either practical or in some ways ethical.
It's anything but a dumb wall.
Kai-Uwe Bergman welcomes others to come up with a better idea.
It is going to be a place that a person can actually go, inhabit, use 100% of the time, and then be reassured that it's actually protecting them against the sea surges.
He says a short-term radical solution is better than none at all.
I think the biggest risk is not doing anything. Many of these communities have heard repeatedly that something would be done. And I think that the biggest fear is that another storm event would come and flood them out of their homes again, and they have to deal with the loss.
Broad Channel is a little island in Queens in the middle of Jamaica Bay. It is a tiny place. I don't think anybody ever heard of it. Unless you live in, in the area. I talk to a lot of people that live, in Manhattan, and they have no idea where Broad Channel is. I've been here, since I'm 4 years old. Same neighbors I had as growing up are the same neighbors I have today. My wife was born in Broad Channel also. Her whole family's from the town.
For years, Bassetti lived in a world that somehow escaped change. Then, about a decade ago, high tides flooded the streets, even on sunny days.
You just get used to it. The high tide comes up, gotta get my daughter to school, all right, get on my back. You piggyback her up to the corner to get her to school on time. This was a full moon high tide. This picture is one of my favorites. The day I was taking my son home from the hospital, he was just born, he was 3 days old. When you live in Broad Channel, you take off your shoes and you carry him down the block. That is total Broad Channel living right there.
Superstorm Sandy turned the inconvenience into a catastrophe.
You couldn't stop it. There's nothing that could stop that water from coming in.
Bassetti and his family evacuated to Brooklyn and returned 2 days later.
So then when I finally got to my house, I go, well, this ain't that bad. Well, it didn't get bad until we started doing the work, you know. First, all right, let's start throwing out everything that's wet, you know, let's empty out underneath the sinks, underneath the closets, let's get rid of these couches.
By the time they are done, there is nothing left to save. Bassetti joined the city's Build It Back program. With a whopping $2.2 billion budget, Build It Back encourages homeowners and businesses to rebuild higher and stronger, more resilient against the rising seas. The city has replaced over 1,400 homes, repaired and reimbursed 6,500 more, with about 1,000 remaining under construction.
Build It Back is raising the home for me. They're raising the house 11 feet from where it started from, which will put me a few feet above that national flood line. I'm hoping I'm prepared enough. I'm hoping my house is raised high enough where the water comes in and I'm not affected. But who knows, it's Mother Nature. You can't predict what she's gonna do.
Frank is one of thousands who are determined to defend. He'll never leave.
Never even crossed my mind. This is a great place to grow up, and I want my kids to have the same environment. The house behind me is the house that I own.
But there was a second option, managed retreat. New York City and state also encouraged people to stop investing in flood-prone areas and leave the land to revert to its natural state. 600 homeowners took this buyout, including Frank Mashinsky.
Ocean breeze was pretty much fantastic. It really was. It was paradise. I miss everything about it. Most is the people that we lost.
2 of Mashinsky's neighbors died here during Superstorm Sandy.
It was the ideal spot to put something just to say, hey, we'll never forget you. Both in their 80s, pillars in the community, great people, and just not supposed to die this way. We had a typical white picket fence, front porch right here, and my house would be from right here on back. Paradise, 364 days a year until the day of the storm comes. My house still had about 3 feet of water in it. It was still on the foundation, but it had been completely submerged. So it's devastation. I did go inside, everything was turned upside down, and I knew there was going to be nothing at all savable. And that's when it really hit me. 3 hours and we don't own anything. One of the neighboring areas on the East Shore started talk of a buyout. One day I received a call from the governor's representative. Congratulations, you were very successful. Your area has the option of the New York State buyout.
Homeowners received full market value for their houses in exchange for leaving.
They took the house down, and as you can see, we're standing here, and there's just grass growing right now. It's doing what it was supposed to, going back to nature, and nature is slowly reclaiming it, and then the animals are coming back too.
Some people decided to stay. You know what? It's America. So they have choice. If they want to put themselves in that predicament in their family, that's their choice.
One bold engineering project is giving the coastal communities of Staten Island hope.
What if we just look at this a whole new way, look at the problem a new way, and look for new solutions?
Pippa Brashear is an urban planner and landscape architect. She works with a team that believes the answer is to stop trying to fight the sea, but to learn to live with it, and even harness it to do good, not harm.
The design project that ultimately came out of it was our Living Breakwaters project. The project is located on the southern tip of Staten Island. It was really pummeled by waves during Sandy. Our Living Breakwaters project, it's a system of offshore breakwaters. Each of the individual breakwaters range from about 300 feet long to 450 feet long, and they are spaced along the shoreline to really protect it from the most damaging waves. The largest breakwaters that are positioned to really knock down those large storm waves, they have to be tall enough that they're still peaking above the top of the water when you have those really elevated surge levels like Sandy. And so those crest elevations are at about 14 feet above mean sea level.
Rather than a continuous seawall, the breakwaters are a series of raised surfaces that slow storm surge. It's an old concept, but the ecological element is a new twist.
Much of the breakwaters will be made from stone, but we're also using these bioenhanced concrete armor units to help jumpstart the ecology. The chemical content of the concrete has been adjusted to attract organisms. This is a scale model of one. It's about half the size of what the actual armor units will be, 4 feet by 4 feet. One of the premises that we had was we have to actually restore the environment. Historic habitats, wetlands, oyster reefs have been decimated. Can we recreate that complex aquatic habitat to really build back this environment?
I think the Living Breakwaters project is great. Something flexible. If the rocks don't work right there, you move the rocks, or you make a new pile of rocks. Those strategies we can actually do, and we can export them to other cities. There are opportunities, and there are always going to be surprises, like oysters on those breakwaters. Well, when the ocean is more acid, I don't know about oysters, but something will live on there.
People are looking for ways to buy time.
I'm not sure we can reverse it, but can we slow it down? Yes, I think we can slow it down. At least as far as the subway system and our commuter rails. I'm committed to make them as resilient as possible for what we can expect over the next 100 to next 200 years.
Right now we have about 104 subway entrances that we find are critical facilities that are in the floodplain. We use flex gates, marine doors.
I call them submarine doors. They basically close each entranceway. They get locked in place. They're very heavy doors. Each one weighs about 3,500 pounds.
These can be deployed in relatively quick time to prevent water from entering the subway system. These are stop logs. So what happens is these two beams get locked in place with these pins. They get locked in place, and then as these logs are stacked, the pins slide into this beam, and as they get stacked to the top, this whole area then becomes watertight.
Another innovation is an inflatable plug made of Kevlar and waterproof fabric. The plugs blow up like balloons to block tunnels against flooding. Made from the same materials as the airbags on the Mars rover, strong enough to cushion the spacecraft if it lands on rocks, these tough balloons fill up with 35,000 gallons of air in just 3 minutes. But the airbags need to be perfectly packed and deployed to provide a watertight seal.
I don't think much of the plugs, those round balls that get filled up with air that will plug it and all of that. You need something a little bit better than some kind of plastic or polymer filled with air to be able to block the water. As we all know, water is extremely strong and powerful.
And at $400,000 each, the city decides they are too expensive to plug all 14 of their under-river subway tunnels.
It's very, very important that we recognize that climate change is real. And if you don't want to recognize that climate change is real, we do have to recognize the sheer fact that water seems to be rising. So what do we do to mitigate that? What do we do to mitigate the risks that are involved in that so we can continue to operate? Are we better off than others? It's hard for me to know because I've not done a comparison, but I do know that we're a lot better off today than we were 5 years ago.
The new Whitney Museum in the Meatpacking District appears to be one of the most flood-resistant museums in the country and perhaps the world. It was built for the future, designed to be resilient against rising sea levels and storm surge. Its loading dock is protected by a waterproof flood door, designed and built by naval engineers. The outer concrete wall was reinforced to become 100% waterproof. Like the subway, the museum also has a stop log system, a deployable barricade that can be installed in just 8 hours in advance of an approaching storm. That doubles Sandy's storm surge height in lower Manhattan, but it's in line with future projections. Urban architect Vishaan Chakrabarty believes that the survival of New York depends on designs like the Whitney. It comes down to new buildings that can endure the inevitable rising water that's coming its way.
You make sure the building can flood, which means that you get all of the vulnerable mechanical equipment out of the basement.
We're in the west tower of the American Copper buildings here on the east side of Manhattan. This building is designed around the 100-year floodplain. Our elevators and our mechanical systems, our power service, our pumps, those are all above that elevation.
You make sure that there's a generator in the building that can't power the entire building, but it can power the elevators, it can power at least one outlet in every apartment so you can charge a cell phone, get information and so forth. Have at least enough light to live, maybe keep a refrigerator running.
We're up here on the 48th floor of the West Tower. This should be our penthouse apartment. Sweeping views all over the city, king of the world type of apartment. Instead, we have 2 megawatts of emergency power. We decided we're gonna put the generators up here because by sacrificing the square feet up here, even though we'd be renting them for upwards of $130 or $150 a foot, we figured by not using those square feet as an apartment, we make all the rest of the square feet in the building that much more valuable. Even when there's no commercial power in this building, you would be able to live here.
Those basic things can actually dramatically change what happens during a storm, because if big buildings are equipped to do that, you then don't have this massive exodus of people who are trying to get out of their homes with flooded streets, first responders, all the other things that are happening simultaneously with that crisis. It's not a very high-tech set of solutions. It's actually a fairly low-tech set of solutions.
The lobby is built above the estimated high water mark for flooding. Even so, the building is designed to flood. And when the water recedes, the damage is minimal, and residents can go right back to their lives.
What's unique about this lobby is the material selection. The floor is stone, the walls are concrete, steel, and stone. The portals are all steel. And the wood feature that we wanted in the lobby is set off the walls so that it's actually a vented system. So that if ever did get wet, we wouldn't be doing any sort of demolition and replacement. The expectation was that eventually something will happen and the building will get wet.
Vishaan Chakrabarty has his own mega project under construction in Brooklyn, one of the most ambitious and resilient plans in the history of the 5 boroughs.
Domino Park is a 3 million square foot new neighborhood that's being built on the waterfront in Brooklyn.
Domino is a mixed-use development with 2,800 condo units, 1/4 of them affordable housing. Its main feature is a huge 6-acre park, a 1/4 mile along the waterfront.
We just went out to the community and we were very open and honest with people and said, you know, look, this needs to be more resilient. And so one of the first moves we had made during the master planning process was to pull the buildings back from the water and actually make a bigger park. That resulted in more climate resilience in the long term because that park has a tremendous amount of porous surface grass, plant material that will take on water. So what happens is when a storm hits, it will both slow the energy of the storm and absorb like a sponge a lot of the water that's coming into the community. It's also designed with the natural grade of the land. So when the storm recedes, the water will recede back into the river more quickly.
The buildings will also have office and retail space, so many residents can stay put through a storm surge.
Domino is an interesting model to really think about how you build in the world that we're going to be living in the next 100 years or so in terms of flooding and sea level rise.
Developers and the city now work together to harden New York against the rising sea. This might prevent incidents such as the transformer explosion in Lower Manhattan during Sandy that left 200,000 people without power, heat, or light.
Our electric grid now has the benefit of an additional $1 billion of hardening that has been placed into the grid to make sure the lights stay on the next time. We're dealing with a very complex set of new projects. They've never been done before, first of its kind in such a dense urban environment. And we're moving them as quickly as we can. I'm hopeful about New York's future because of the ability that New Yorkers have shown to adapt to any number of challenges over its nearly 400-year history. We're going to be here, we're going to work with the threats, we're going to adapt, and this is going to be a thriving city.
Many will defend, but some will be forced to retreat. That is New York City's inevitable future.
I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to whether we should build or not in the floodplain. There's hundreds of thousands of people in New York City that live in floodplains. And I think there are probably some cases where it just simply doesn't make sense, where it's not just a floodplain, it's a highly vulnerable floodplain. Retreat in that instance might make sense.
What this means for the future, it means seawall or levee protection, storm surge barriers, or the city could encourage more building and population on higher ground and do things to try to discourage or buy people out who are in these low-lying flooded areas.
There are some clear statistics out there that for every dollar we invest in risk reduction, that there's a $4 avoided future cost. Sandy was a $19 billion event in terms of damages and lost economic activity. From the risks of climate change, that same event in the 2050s could be a $90 billion event.
I think we have to prepare for the unexpected. And what that means is, how do you create a city that can recover from any number of tough things happening to it, whether it's a flood or a tornado or a terrorist attack. Cities are vulnerable. Cities have always been vulnerable. Cities also have this extraordinary way of being resilient and building back. And so, to me, it's always about the basics. Mobility, power, water. Fixing this is not rocket science, right? It's simply a question of will.
Urban engineering will be the determining factor in just how New York faces its next great challenge. It's a transformation that has to happen if it is to survive and even thrive when the water comes.
We have the situation that about 1 million more people are expected to move to New York City by the year 2030. In addition, waterfront is still considered the most desirable real estate, which is a notion from the past that doesn't hold for the future.
If we're really going to adapt to climate change, it's about behavior change. It's about us all thinking about living with water differently and being willing to change and adapt over time.
This is our home, and we want to keep it our home, and we want it to be a home for our children and our grandchildren as well. So now's the time to start dealing with the problem.
And I think if we do that, this city, which is one of the greatest cities in the world, will continue to be for a long, long time.
Major funding for Sinking Cities is provided by Dr. P. Roy and Diana T. Vagelos, with additional funding from Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III. and the Mark Haas Foundation. Sinking Cities is also supported by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations and by viewers like you. Thank you.